welcome to a lovely Tuesday and News Talk here on Santa Cruz Voice. News Talk from 9 to noon as usual, so pour that second cup of coffee, kick back, and get ready to go. I'll do some of the talking, but I wish you'd do some too. 831-265-5050 is the telephone number to reach the program, 265-5050, and you too can make your voice heard on this program. Ask the questions you want to ask, raise the issues you want to raise. 265-5050. Yesterday I opened the program by, shall we say, criticizing President Trump for his move in taking a 10% stake in Intel, essentially nationalizing a part of this corporation. Nor was this the first time he'd done it. His golden share of United States Steel. These things point toward an industrial policy which the United States has resisted for years, and which I had always feared if it ever took root in this country. I figured, this is one of the things the Democrats are going to do. Imagine my anguish to see a president I voted for doing this. I can remember 29 years ago, Bill Clinton, a very adept politician, very smart at sticking the wet finger up into the air and reading which way the wind was blowing. After he got his head handed to him in the 1994 off-year election, weeks later, he's standing before this new Republican Congress, the most conservative Congress in decades. And Bill Clinton, the Democrat, said the era of big government is over. Well, I guess what they should have said was the era of big government is briefly interrupted, because Donald Trump didn't get that memo. In his second term, President Trump is embracing perhaps the most sweeping expansion of federal power that we've seen, I don't know how long. He bullies state governments, using military force if necessary. He tells private institutions how to operate. He extorts law firms into doing free work for the government. And now he's taking a stake in Intel. For decades, the American right and the Republican Party held themselves up as the defenders of individual citizens, corporations, and state and local governments against intrusive control from Washington. But where Ronald Reagan joked that the 9 most terrifying words of the English language were, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help," Trump's credo seems to be, "I am the government and I'm here to take over." The debate in America is no longer about whether socialism can gain a foothold. It is whether the socialism will be left-wing or right-wing. Conservative pundits have long used socialist as a ready-made epithet for left-of-center policy ideas. Trump called Kamala Harris a communist during the campaign, but he's offering proof that a government can be both socialist and conservative. As recently as 2016, conservative writer Michael Anton argued in favor of a Trump presidency. He warned of the soul-sapping effects of paternalistic big government and its cannibalization of civil society and religious institutions. Today, that's a reasonable description of what's going on. Last week, the Trump administration announced the government was taking a 10% stake in Intel. This would be remarkable enough on its own. The federal government doesn't usually take stakes in any corporation, except in cases of imminent collapse that endanger the national economy. Wall Street Journal reports that this was more of a protection racket than a business deal. First, the announcement was made after the president demanded Intel's CEO resign over past business dealings with the Chinese military. Second, a stake was bought with $8.9 billion already promised to Intel as grants under a 2022 law passed by Congress. That was the CHIPS Act. That was one of Mr. Biden's accomplishments. Mr. Trump can be, I guess, in a way excused or pardoned if he's saying, well, if Joe Biden is going to give all this money to these companies, Maybe we ought to get something for it. Maybe we ought to have a partial stake in that company. I'm sorry, two wrongs don't make a right. The proper response to this is to end these subsidies. But of course, the problem is that Mr. Trump does not have the ability to repeal the CHIPS Act. Or does he? Well, of course, it would have to be done by Congress. You could get it through the House. We have a Republican majority there. I guess Massey of Kentucky would vote no on it. He votes no on everything, but we've lost him a couple of times and still gotten bills passed. In the Senate, the question is, would this be subject to the filibuster? And we have arrived at a position now where the Democrats filibuster everything. Everything. I believe a motion to adjourn would be subjected to a filibuster by Senate Democrats. So the only alternative the president would have is impoundment, which the Supreme Court has said is not legal. I still think that's bunk. Speaking with reporters today, President Trump agreed his action is a form of industrial policy. Okay, well, at least the president's being upfront about it. When the Biden administration adopted this approach, in which government is more closely involved in private business, Republicans and conservatives attacked it as socialism. The self-described socialist senator, Bernie Sanders, is, in a rare case of agreement with President Trump, on board with the Intel deal. Wow. Does that tell you something you need to know? There are certain people in this country, I kind of think of them as indicators. If you find yourself aligned with these people, it's time to re-examine. Maybe, there's the old adage, well, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Maybe Bernie Sanders is that broken clock. Maybe he's right twice a day. But generally speaking, particularly on matters of philosophical intent like this, if you find yourself getting kind words and support from Bernie Sanders, it is time to reverse course. A smiling Bernie Sanders is bad for America. And this is making Bernie Sanders smile. He is lending support to the Trump administration. This is actual socialism happening by a Republican administration, says Eric Erickson, veteran conservative commentator. You may not be comfortable with socialism. You may decide you like socialism because someone from the Trump administration wants socialism. But my God, people, what have been we fighting for the last decade? Fair question. And I don't know. This is so appalling that I thought I'd talk about it again today. I raised the question yesterday and was met by a thunderous silence. Not a single person called in to talk about it, agree or disagree. And of course, I don't know. This almost causes me physical pain. After all, I voted for this administration. And I'll admit, the reason I voted was to keep the Ayatollah from having a bomb. And on that issue, the president has kept faith with me, and I've given him credit for that, and I keep that in mind. But I also can't help but remember that this was a president who had made some comments that I found disqualifying. Let me see. A massive fraud of this type of magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. At that point, Mr. Trump was talking about his election fraud allegations, which still have gone nowhere. But the key to it was he said that this was so important, so imperative that the Constitution could be abrogated. Such language is never permissible. There is nothing that rises to that level. The Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. And when he raised his right hand and took his oath of office, Mr. Trump pledged to preserve, protect, and defend it. Can you imagine what the framers of the Constitution would have had to say about a federal government that is now becoming involved in state-owned enterprises? State-owned enterprises, that's a familiar phrase. We've heard it before, haven't we? Yeah, that's right. It's a fundamental fact of life in communist China. And as a matter of fact, their state-owned enterprises are what have been a drag, a perennial drag on their economy. So it's not only an abuse of freedom and the market system, it's counterproductive. A lose-lose situation. This piece that I've been excerpting for you is from The Atlantic. Normally The Atlantic, this is obviously a left-oriented publication. And in the next paragraph, they go off the deep end. Meanwhile, Trump is attempting to force states to stop using mail-in ballots, which he falsely claims are linked to fraud. Well, I'm sorry. It was the Blue Ribbon Panel on Elections, co-chaired by James Baker and Jimmy Carter, that said that mail-in ballots are the most vulnerable of all to fraud. So, it's interesting. An author in a left-wing publication can shift instantly from making a good point to making an utterly ludicrous one. Just like that, from one paragraph to another. But that's what you get when you read left-wing agendized presentations. That isn't to say you shouldn't read them. Got to know what the opposition is up to, but you read with a jaundiced eye. I still think the most appalling thing I learned about this is that on this issue, Mr. Trump is now drawing support and finding himself in league with Bernie Sanders. That is really a wonderful place to draw your support from. Not. What else we got today? Have you heard of the Minneapolis Mamdani? Remember, you know who Zoran Mamdani is. He's this ultra-left, anti-Semite, crazy man who's going to be the next mayor of New York because he succeeded in winning the Democratic nomination in a primary in which turnout was, 15, 18%, something like that. Nobody bothered to come out and vote. And so this is what you get. Well, a few weeks later, in the state of Minnesota, their largest city, Minneapolis, has an election for mayor coming up. And the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, which is the Democratic Party in Minnesota, has now nominated a man by the name of, Omar Fatah? Let me see. Omar Fatah. F-A-T-E-H, Fateh. Anyway, the latest seems to be a kerfluffle about this. Now, this comes from The Nation, once again a left-oriented publication, so one would think that they would be sympathetic to these individuals. First paragraph goes on to point out that in the history of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, there have been fights before. The DFL is where grassroots activists have lifted up political outsiders and put them on paths to prominence. Minneapolis DFL endorsed the mayoral campaign of State Senator Omar Fateh. Fateh's focus on affordability issues, his challenge to Democratic Party lethargy, have garnered comparisons to New York Zoran Mamdani, Fateh has embraced these comparisons. Initially, the Minneapolis DFL appeared to agree. In the final formal balloting at the July convention, more than 60% of delegates chose to back Fateh over a Democratic incumbent mayor, Jacob Fry. So this is even more earth-shattering than what happened in New York. At least, in New York, the incumbent mayor had left the Democratic Party because he understood that he was so unpopular that he could not possibly be renominated. But in Minneapolis, Mayor Fry had distinguished himself last year, issued a record number of vetoes, a measure approved by the city council, which is dominated by a leftist majority, including a Gaza ceasefire resolution. As if the city council of Minneapolis doesn't have important work to do running the city of Minneapolis, they have to run foreign policy. I have never been in sympathy with local governmental organizations or governing bodies taking stands on, urging actions on things which are none of their constitutional business. Just before the convention adjourned, and at a point when a number of Mr. Fry's backers had left, Fateh won a show-of-hands vote where delegates held up badges to indicate whom they supported. The surprise has now come. Last week, a DFL party committee revoked the endorsement. Whoa! After Fry and his allies complained that a highly flawed and untested electronic voting system produced a significant number of uncounted votes at the convention. Oh my gosh. Concerns were also raised about delays tied to slow internet connections and a host of issues that frustrated backers of both leading contenders. Fry celebrated the decision to revoke the endorsement, saying, "I'm proud to be a member of a party that believes in correcting our mistakes." State DFL leaders called for unity, but Fateh and his backers said the revocation represented an outrageous overreach by the state party. So now the Minnesota DFL is having a monumental war with itself over this. I confess that as I was reading this, my memory went back to a time long ago during the provisional government in Russia, which ran that country for a few brief months between the overthrow of the Tsar in, I believe, February of 1917 and the coup d'etat by the Bolsheviks in October. During that period of time, many local governing bodies that were called Soviets, local Soviets, they would have various political factions show up, including the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks had a surefire tactic. Lenin's idea for how to organize the Bolsheviks was it doesn't have to be a large number of people. We're not looking for a mass movement here. What we have to have are fanatics. What we have to have are people who are absolutely 100%, politics is your entire life. Lenin never had any other kind of job. Political activism was the only thing he knew how to do. He never produced anything of value to anybody. So what would happen in these meetings? Well, the Bolshevik faction would show up, and they would stay, and they would stay, and they would stay, and they would stay. And the meeting might be convened at 7 or 8 o'clock, 9, 10, midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. The Bolsheviks are still there. Everybody else, hey, I've got a life. I've got to get up in the morning and go to work. I can't be here until the break of dawn. Sometime around 3:30 or 4 in the morning, the Bolsheviks would still be there. And all of a sudden, even though their numbers were small, all of a sudden they had a majority because everybody else had left. I am not making this up. This was the tactic adopted. And as you might imagine, it was effective. So in the wee hours, as the sun was starting to rise in those Arctic climes, the Bolsheviks would pass their motions and effect the policies they wanted to effect. Because everybody else was normal. Everybody else actually had a life. But to Bolsheviks, the only life was politics. Well, it looks as if we have the same thing going in the Democratic Party today. The people who are, we hear it all the time, oh, look at the energy and dedication of these leftists in the Democratic Party. They call themselves progressives. I will not dignify that honorable term. They are leftists. And to give them their due, they have that dedication. They have that energy. They have that same Leninist spark, that same will to power that drove Vladimir Ilyich to become the first dictator of the Soviet Union. Now, at the one time, you have to give credit to that, but at the other, I mean, this is dangerous as all hell. What other kinds of people do you run into who have this absolute dedication to political activity and can do nothing else? Are you seeing a picture of Der Schnifter? I am. You ever read anything about Adolf Hitler? People called him a paper hanger. People called him a painter. But really, Hitler's only occupation, was political activism. After he came back from World War I, this was what he set out to do. Political organizing, rabble-rousing, fomenting riots and civic unrest, getting himself sent to jail. And eventually rising to become Führer, the leader of the National Socialist Party, and one of the worst disasters to ever happen to the world. Well, not everybody rises to those heights. Thank God. But when you look at these energetic people on the left, the Omar Fatehs and the Zoran Mandamis, and you see that other than political activity, they have no lives. This is particularly true of Mr. Mamdani. The little we've learned about him so far, this is all he's ever done. Even as a kid in school. So, how can I put it? A person who seeks power so assiduously ought not to have it. And the modern left is cluttered with people who seek power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's 5:30. Let's grab a break. I'm Charles Freedman. The time is 9:30. The telephone number is 831-265-5050. Looking for our first phone call.
The Santa Cruz County Fair opens Wednesday, September 10th with FMX Rampage at the Grandstand featuring Adam Jones, X-Game gold medalist, with his action team. Thursday, it's the Outlaw Mariachi. Friday, it's the White Album Ensemble. Saturday, Red returns, a Taylor Swift tribute band. And Sunday, the Chata Show, and that evening, Los Dinos. And our drone show at 9 o'clock each night. Pre-sale tickets and information at SantaCruzCountyFair.com.
The Santa Cruz County Fair.
When you need help escaping from an abusive relationship, call on the Angel.
Hello, I am Attorney Angel Hess, and I am ready to help you. Whether you or a loved one needs legal protection from an abusive spouse, cohabitant, or neighbor, I will help you. I have over 7 years' experience working as a lawyer protecting others from abusive relationships.
Stop the abuse now. Call on the Angel, Attorney Angel L. Hess at santacruzlegal.net.
Cannabis is one of nature's most beneficial plants. Hello, I'm Jenna. Treehouse Dispensary, we use information about cannabis to build community. Listen to Carly.
Thanks, Jenna. For those who wake up in the middle of the night, Treehouse suggests a THC CBN chocolate edible blend like Sleepy Time from Sensi Chew. Sleep the night away.
For answers to your cannabis questions, ask your friends at Treehouse Dispensary, 3651 Soquel Drive in Soquel, or ourtreehouse.io.
What's your family eating for dinner? Chef Ben here at the Back 9 Grill and Bar, where you can pick up family dinner that feeds 4 to 6 hungry people. Family meals include a full rack of ribs, a whole smoked chicken, pound of pulled pork, and plenty of barbecue sauce. Served with a full quart of baked beans, coleslaw, macaroni and cheese, dinner rolls, pickles, a side of onions, and for dessert, brownies with a pint of Mary Ann's vanilla ice cream. Call and order your family's dinner about 15 minutes before you want to eat. See you at the 9.
And at 9:32, we are live once again. News Talk from 9 till noon on Santa Cruz Voice with yours truly, Charles Freedman. Call the program at 831-265-5050 and make your contribution. I've been talking for the last few minutes about people whose entire life is political. And, I mean, this is certainly a criticism that cannot be leveled against all of our most recent presidents. Dwight Eisenhower made his living as a military man before he became president. Ronald Reagan had been in entertainment, show business, and then became interested in politics and had a political career. Donald Trump has made most of his life as a businessman, deal maker. Now he's in his this is an old guy. My God, he's 79 now. He has tremendous energy, and we all respect that. But nevertheless, I mean, this is definitely a retirement activity for him. But what of, for instance, Barack Obama? Does he fit that mold of the political person? What of Joe Biden? I submit to you that both of these men fit perfectly into that mold. Barack Obama, his meteoric rise, Illinois State Senate, 2 years in the U.S. Senate, was it 4, something like that, less than a term, and then President of the United States. How in the world? He was able to unify and put some rather powerful forces behind him to accomplish that. Now, you might, well, Charles, do you respect that? Yes. Oh, yes, I respect it. It's a hell of an accomplishment. But you look at what Barack Obama did before that. He was a community organizer. Political activity is all he ever did. He has never done any constructive work in his life. He's never performed any services for anybody. He's never helped manufacture a product. And what about Joe Biden? I still don't understand how he managed to do it, but Joe Biden got elected to the United States Senate at the age of 29. You might say, well, how could he do that? The Constitution requires you to be 30 years old. Here's the answer. The election, we all know, is in November. The new officers aren't sworn in until January. Mr. Biden's 30th birthday fell during that period. So on the day he was elected senator, he was 29 years old. But by the time he took his seat, he had reached the constitutional age of 30. Prior to that, what did Joe Biden do? Political activity. School and political activity. And as you well know, to certain types of people, school is political activity. So here you have a couple of fellows, the last two Democratic presidents, both of whom made careers out of seeking power. Amazing, the coincidence. I remember when Barack Obama was elected to a second term when he defeated Mitt Romney, and I came in, and instead of starting my program with my usual theme music, I began it with Chopin's Funeral March. Because it seemed to me that the fact that this terrible president should never have gotten a second term. And of course, I have to, as a Republican, I have to wear the fact that my party did not come up with somebody capable of beating him. That's on Mitt Romney. The election was his to lose. And he did. It also goes to speak to the political skills of Barack Obama. And those political skills were very, very considerable. But what of his accomplishment? More than most Americans, Chicagoans really lived the full arc of decline from Obama's election in 2008 until the end of his term and till the present day. Expectations, remember, were sky high. Barack Obama got, 53% of the popular vote in 2008. But when he took office in January, he had an approval rating 75, 78%, something like that. Even most of the people who hadn't voted for him were on his side. They were rooting for him. Through the middle of a brutal economic crisis, Americans largely rejoiced at Obama's win. They hoped for better times. They figure America's first black president would accelerate racial healing. That was already a strong trend in society at that time, but Obama took things in the opposite direction. The economy did stabilize, but only for the already successful. Remember, in the 6th year or something like that of Obama's presidency, and he was going, the economy's expanding, we're in a recovery. But if you went out on the street and asked people, are we in a recession or not? They'd say, yeah, we're in a recession. Because that's what it felt like. The word to describe Barack Obama's economy: stagnant, moribund, lifeless. Working class people lost ground during Obama's presidency. I cover the brutal economic stats. Worse than the economic failures, he set race relations back by years. Instead of channeling Dr. King and challenging America to live up to our own stated ideals, he shamed and divided citizens at every possible opportunity. He became the divider-in-chief. It is interesting. People complain, and justifiably so, about Donald Trump being a divisive figure. Barack Obama was the guy who created that model. He went out of his way to be a divisive figure, to let his political opponents know you've lost and you get down there. Right after he was elected, meets with Republican members of Congress and reminds them, hey, I won the election. Any attempt to say, well, let's have some bipartisan cooperation, let's all work together, nothing of the sort. A stiff arm. Race relations worsened dramatically under his leadership, and he continues to fan the flames of division to this very day. It's one big reason he became a negative political force in the 2024 election. His post-presidency has been really almost shameful. He lives a life of excess, cashing in for wealthy sums, living like a celebrity glitterati, unconcerned with the people he claimed to represent, scolding voters, especially black men, and building a hideous monument to himself on Chicago's South Shore. Have you heard about this is the Obama Presidential Library. It is turning out to be a monumental eyesore, and the people of South Side Chicago are outraged about it. Barack Obama a talented politician whose talents, unfortunately, were turned in, well, let's just be blunt and say the wrong direction. And again, a man whose entire life was spent in political activity, nothing else ever interested him. And he exhibited no other talent. The professional political politician. On this program for years, I've recommended Paul Johnson's book, Modern Times. I recommend it again. It is, I honestly believe it's the greatest work of nonfiction ever written. It's just that good. Amazingly good. And one of the repeating themes of that book is this story of the professional politician. I've already spoken of people like Lenin, Hitler, and this same ugly model rears its head in country after country after country. The Juan Perones, here in America, the Obamas, the Bidens, peoples like this who, outside of politics, they have no lives. Not at all. Spooky. Really spooky. Telephone number is 831-265-5050, 831-265-5050. Talk about something else for a while. There's a tragic story coming out of Gaza. Israeli strikes on a hospital in southern Gaza killed at least 20 people, including 5 journalists, medical staff, patients, and rescue workers. Israel says it carried out the strike in the area of Nasser Hospital. An inquiry has been ordered. The IDF regrets any harm to uninvolved individuals. It doesn't target journalists as such. Needless to say, the usual screams of outrage are going on. Oh, those vile Israelis. Well, let us make sure that we understand exactly who is responsible for this and every other thing that has happened since October 7th, 2023. This destroyed hospital is the work of Hamas. And if they weren't hiding their military assets in hospitals and hiding behind the Red Cross, or, pardon me, the Red Crescent, as a tactic to preserve their military machinery, and once again, none of this would have occurred. I'm looking at an article here that George Bisharat in the Los Angeles Times and a major contributor to the Democratic Party is saying that the Democrats will pay for ignoring the base on Gaza. There's a picture here of Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat of California, represents a district down in Southern California. He and other Democratic lawmakers recently visited Israel, met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And this is described in this article as a failure. Profound moral and political miscalculation. The failure is on vivid display. Democratic caucus chair Pete Aguilar led a group of mostly freshman Democrats to Israel. The trip included meetings with Netanyahu, who is on trial for corruption and is the subject of arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court. Well, any time when all you can say about Netanyahu is to point out all the lawfare being carried on against him, you know who you're listening to. You know where their sympathies lie. And as I pointed out many times, the International Criminal Court is one of those rare examples today of truth in advertising. An honest name. It is international, it is a court, and it is criminal. Polling makes the disconnect impossible to ignore. Gallup found 8% of Democrats today approve of Israel's military campaign in Gaza, with disapproval overwhelming. Well, there are plenty of Israelis who don't like what's going on in Gaza either. And the idea that Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't have to listen to them or can ignore them, that's ridiculous. Unlike the other governments in the Middle East, Israel is a functioning democracy. Netanyahu has lost elections and been out of power more than once. He understands thoroughly the consequences of losing public support. You lose your job. But let me ask you this. What's a mother to do? On the one hand, you have people in Israel who are demanding the return of hostages that Hamas continues to hold. Last I've heard, it's something like 50 hostages, 30 of whom are dead. Now you might think, well, people can let go of dead hostages, can't they? No, they can't. They don't. That's not something that's going on there. They want their loved ones back, even if they are defunct, for the purpose of giving them a decent burial. I understand all of this. But the live ones are the ones I'm most concerned about, and they're being treated horribly. And the people of Israel want them back. Okay, that's great. I'm down with that. But some of these same people now are saying, well, we oppose Netanyahu. He's not trying to get the hostages back. Well, then how would you do it? Oh, you give Hamas anything they want. Hamas has terms for returning the hostages, just like, for example, Putin has terms for ending his war in Ukraine. And they're similar. They are demanding essentially a surrender. They're demanding accommodations they have been altogether unable to win. So they want to be gifted them. We'll have more on the Russian version of that later in the program, but for right now we're talking about Hamas. Hey, we've got ourselves a phone call. How about that? Let's grab it and talk with Evan. Yeah, we've got more than 10 minutes. That's great. Plenty of time. Hello there. How are you doing?
Hey, Charles. Evan here. Thank you for taking my call in. Happy Tuesday. Yeah, your subject on Israel, sir. I don't 100% agree with your statement.
Which one?
I still don't agree with the fact that how they're choosing to destroy churches and schools. You'd be out of a job. And I just don't find it great military tactics.
I agree with you. I agree with you. The problem is that Hamas insists on carrying on its operations from these schools.
So let me ask you a question. If there's no more churches and schools to destroy, what do they do now? Start attacking homes? I'm just I'm not a fan of how Israel is going ahead and doing these attacks. Well, they need to do more, send in military. I think they have a more bigger picture. They might be destroying Gaza. Because why would you go ahead and destroy these things of people that need, are they going to start destroying supermarkets next? What?
Can I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
The answer to your question is, if you are trying to trying to track down, trying to deal with Hamas. That's the target. Hamas is the target. So when Hamas hides in churches, that's where you go to find Hamas. When Hamas,
but that's not your attack. But that's not. Don't we agree? Both of us will agree that churches and aren't the place to bomb.
Well, I
do better tactics.
Okay, in that case, why don't you criticize Hamas for carrying on their war activities from churches and schools? Why is it Israel's fault that Hamas does this?
Because they're destroying churches and schools.
Oh, criminal!
They need to do better and go in and rescue these hostages. It's time.
How? Hamas?
Just like we do at when schools are invaded here, we don't blow them up. We have police, we have military go in and take them out.
We don't have anybody here like Hamas. We don't have anything like this. And
we have factions that take out. No, we've had younger students go in with their rifles into schools, and what happens?
Well, now what you're doing is you're equating Hamas with these, shooters we've seen at various schools, and there's no equation there. First of all, a school shooter is an individual. Hamas is an organization. That's difference number one. Secondly, the school shooter is simply interested in creating havoc, and then quite often they kill themselves. Hamas is dedicated to killing Jews. And so what they will do is they will they take hostages, they then attempt to create propaganda and create bad feeling against Israel by taking up residence or taking up positions inside these places that you say, I don't like schools targeted, I don't like churches targeted. On that we agree. I don't like that either. But if that's where your sworn enemy, your genocidal enemy, has chosen to hole up, that's where you have to go to get him. I don't see any alternative. Now, you suggested, why don't they just go in and get them? What do you think they're trying to do? What do you think?
I think what Netanyahu, or I'm not sure, I think they have a bigger picture. I think what they're doing is trying to destroy Gaza itself.
As a matter of fact, Hamas has done a pretty good job over that over the last 15
I actually disagree. I think it's Israel that's been taking the more of... Hamas isn't destroying churches or schools. It's Israel, sir.
No, Hamas destroyed the entire fabric of Gaza. They denied their... And what do you have? 2 million people there? A little over 2 million people? The only function they have insofar as Hamas is concerned is to serve their war effort. There was starvation in Gaza before this war ever broke out. And when food supplies would come in, Hamas would take them and sell them to Gazan civilians. They wouldn't make them available for free. They wouldn't say, here's food, eat. Oh no, pungle up, give us dough. It's difficult for us as Westerners to understand just exactly the degree of awful that Hamas is. They are off the charts evil.
100%, sir. Agree. I don't think we're going to disagree with there. I just wanted to point out my thoughts. Again, I just don't think Israel's doing the greatest attacking. We'll end that, and I'll leave your...
Wait a second. We've got a couple of minutes left here. Perhaps there's something I'm overlooking. You're saying, well, I don't like the way Israel is attempting to deal with Hamas. Tell me, give me your alternative. What should they do?
I couldn't give you a straight answer right now, honestly, on air. And, with the amount of minutes I've got for your answer, I wouldn't want to go ahead and answer it, honestly. So I appreciate it. Again, thank you for taking my call. no doubt, I'd like to just kind of leave you at this point, and yeah, I appreciate it, sir.
Okay. Thank you for the call.
Yeah, yeah. Have a good rest of your Tuesday, sir. Bye-bye.
Well, there you go. So, criticism, when I offer criticism, for example, of Donald Trump, I'll always be, if somebody says, well, what should he do? I'll have an answer for that. This is what he should do. But here we had criticism of Israel. I don't like what they're doing there. I don't think that's justified. I think that's just terrible. All right, what should they do? I can't answer that. Well, I have to honor that. I mean, it's certainly an honest response. But it reminds me, I was talking a few minutes ago before the caller joined us, of people in Israel right now. On the one hand, they're criticizing their own government. These are Israelis, so the Israeli government is their government, acts in their name. They're saying, we don't like what you're doing, but we demand that you get us the hostages back. I don't understand. On the one hand, you say you want the hostages back. Evan agreed with that. He wants the hostages back. He's a decent human being. He doesn't say, oh, well, to hell with them. No, nobody's saying that. But unless you are willing to undertake the operations necessary to penetrate Hamas and to deal with Hamas, and this is not pretty. They do not make it pretty. And decent people, and I include Evan in that, decent people recoil from this. They, oh my God, we can't do that. This is what Hamas counts on. This is the tool of the fanatic. You make it clear that you are willing to do anything. You are willing to commit any atrocity. You're willing to hide behind women's skirts. You're willing to hide behind doctors, clergy, teachers. All of these things that we look at and say, well, that's appalling. That's against the rules of war. That's their normal activity. That's how they operate. And so it seems to me that, unfortunately, Evan and a lot of these other people, if they allow their own decent instincts to run wild, they essentially allow Hamas to have its own way. When you are fighting somebody as vicious and amoral and evil as Hamas, viciousness, amorality, and evil come to the fore. And bear in mind, whose fault is it? Who bears the guilt for this? Hamas. But of course, Hamas, they don't do guilt. They don't care. It is really difficult to communicate to anybody the level of appalling that these people live on. It's 10 o'clock. I'll be back in 6 minutes with more of the program. Stay tuned for news and weather. Okay. Oops.
My old pal Bill Maher is at it again. He's got this, the TDS gets in his eyes sometimes and he says some wacky things, and here's one of them, SOT 23.
I don't know if I was the first one to use the phrase slow-moving coup. If there was a slow-moving coup, let me just describe some of this to me if I'm being paranoid. First, create a masked police force. Normalize snatching people off the street. Normalize seeing the National Guard and the military. Have other states start sending their troops. So you have in the capital a sort of permanent police presence. So when an election dispute might come up, just hypothetically, I'm going to pretend for the rest of the duration that the Democrats do have a chance of winning and they might win the next election. I just don't think they're ever going to take power because this is what's going to happen. Because I think this coup is going to go off a lot smoother than the last one.
Oh, so you see, Trump's not going to leave office, and that's why he's bringing troops into D.C. so they can be permanently stationed there, so they can make sure he stays in office for a third term, even though it's unconstitutional. And the masked police, meaning the ICE agents whose homes are being doxxed, is crazy talk.
Journalists couldn't get
belief that Trump is a fascist, and that every move he's making is not because he genuinely wants.
This has nothing to do with that. Okay.
Good evening. As the conflict in the Middle
Okay, welcome once again. News Talk from 9 to noon on Santa Cruz Voice. I'm Charles Freedman. The telephone number to reach the program is 831-265-5050. I'm still conjuring on our phone call from Evan just a few minutes ago, and I'm glad he called because I think he's expressing the thoughts of a lot of people. And he looks at, for example, this story in today's news that Israel is now expressing regret and sorrow over an attack on a medical facility. In this particular case, it looks as if they actually targeted this place by accident, which is just awful. I mean, there's no good side to this. But why did this attack happen at all? What presaged the entire war? The October 7th terror attack, and of course, the taking of the hostages. Can anyone imagine? I mean, that terror attack was now 2.5 years ago. Of course, after an attack like that, Israel was going to retaliate. Anybody would. But would the retaliation have taken the form of this 2.5-year-long campaign if Hamas hadn't taken the hostages? The answer, of course, is no. For quite some time now, the only possible reason for continued Israeli military action was because of the hostages. I cannot remember how long ago on this program I said we could have peace tomorrow. Hamas, release the hostages. Now, Hamas seems to think that keeping the hostages is the only thing that's keeping them alive. Hell, right now, keeping the hostages is the only thing that's keeping Israel going, militarily. There are plenty of voices in Israel saying this is enough. We've had enough. We don't want any more of this. If Hamas were to return the hostages, those voices would become overwhelming. But Hamas won't do that. Hamas will not release the hostages. You might, a few minutes ago, I'm talking about just exactly how obdurate Hamas is. Here is an interview with a Hamas terrorist in which he explains just exactly what his organization's true goals are.
Good evening. As the conflict in the Middle East continues to rage, the motivations for each of the factions remain complex and difficult to understand. That's why tonight we're sitting down with a brave Hamas freedom fighter to find out what it is their organization wants. Thank you for being here tonight. What are the pressing needs of your people? What goals is it that you're working for? What deep and lasting vision are you looking to implement in the region?
I just want to kill the Jews.
Well, we might have a little bit of a language barrier here. So, because I think what you mean is that you just want to enact justice against those who are restricting your freedoms, of course.
Maybe I wasn't clear. I apologize. We want to kill all Jews who are restricting our freedom to kill more Jews.
But just so our viewers understand, when you say kill all Jews, it's a metaphor. You don't mean that literally. Much like from the river to the sea, it is an aspirational call for freedom and human rights.
Exactly. It is our aspiration to kill all Jews from the river to the sea, and then all the rest of the Jews. In fact, are there any Jews here tonight?
What?
Maybe just one or two I could kill, so the trip over wasn't a total waste.
I don't think you can do that here. We don't do that here, right? No, that's not allowed. Yeah.
Too bad. If I killed a few Jews here, I could deduct the travel as business expense.
So you can see, of course, how the oppression that this poor person has suffered at the hands of Israel has led him to this awful extremism.
Yes, the oppression has been horrible. Israel has forced us to spend all the billions of aid dollars we received from your country on tunnels and to make our leaders in Qatar billionaires when that money should be going
to building a thriving society.
To killing the Jews.
So, as you engage in your noble fight, what is your glorious vision of a better, more equitable society? What future are you fighting for?
My future is as a martyr in glorious paradise after killing
the Jew thing. Yeah, we get that. I know, but that can't be all that you want.
Oh, no. Of course not.
Oh, well, really, what else is it that you're after? What are the complex and noble aims of your inspiring organization?
We also want to uplift the LGBTQ plus community.
Oh, so moving.
On top of a building and then throw them
that's
over.
not. Don't say that you want to kill anybody, the Jews or anybody else on TV. Okay?
Okay. I won't say it. But you can read it in our charter or just look up the statements from any of our leaders on YouTube. We're pretty upfront about it. We just want to kill the Jews.
Sadly, we may never know what it is that Hamas wants.
Let me just email you a link from our charter.
Stop. Their motivations are complex and mysterious. All we can know for sure is that they are oppressed. So no matter what, we must support them.
There. You can read the charter now. It says to kill the Jews.
Did you just rickroll me?
Classic! You should have seen the look on your face. Oh, that is good. Hey, is that a Jew?
Who, Goldstein? Oh, no.
Hey, Jew! Get back here!
He's a Scientologist!
Yes, I will admit, that was a Babylon Bee satire. But I've always been one of those people who believes that in satire is much truth. Satire isn't good, isn't funny, unless it is based on truth. And the depiction of the Hamas terrorist here was true. Read it on our charter. It says right there. We're very upfront about it. We do not mince words. All of these statements are true statements. Hamas is very clear about what it is they want. Their only quarrel with Adolf Hitler was that he didn't finish the job. And this is the business that they are about and will be about as long as they have the opportunity to do so. They're implacable. They do not turn from their cause. They're really, in that sense, and I've said this many times, they're astonishing in their single-mindedness, their dedication. It's just a shame that this single-mindedness and dedication are all aimed at a horrible genocidal goal. Now, this is a word that gets bandied about a lot today. Genocide. We hear the term genocide often and again. Unfortunately, many of the times we hear it, it's a hoax. Extraordinarily effective Hamas propaganda has delegitimized Israel's right of self-defense by confirming for a world that scorns Israel that its demon is engaged in genocide. It is not. But the same cannot be said of Hamas, the aggressor, which was largely avoided that opprobrium. Once again, just as Evan calls in, he criticizes the Israeli Defense Forces. They shouldn't be behaving the way they are. He doesn't criticize Hamas. Israel should not seek out Hamas in churches and mosques and schools. Why not? Because Hamas shouldn't hide that, but it does. It does. So what is to be done? I put that question to Evan, and in all honesty, he says, I can't answer that. I don't know what to do. And that's really the unfortunate thing. There comes a point when you are confronting this kind of evil where you just want to throw up your hands and say, how far can I go down that road? And that makes sense. It really does. According to the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, there are 5.5 million Palestinians in the Palestinian state. Now, most of those are in the West Bank area. Some are in Gaza. The Bureau estimates that at least the last 12 months, Gaza's population has declined by 15,000 odd to 2,114,000 odd, while Palestine's total population grew by 1.17% in 2024 and is projected to grow 1.5% in 2025. According to the Bureau, the principal figures in Gaza's population decline were emigration, war casualties, and a declining birth rate. Though the Gaza Ministry of Health's war casualty reports are statistically implausible and quietly rejected by the UN, the world's media uncritically repeat the lies. Most recently, the media disseminated the ministry's claim that war deaths exceed 60,000, reducing Gaza's population by 10%. The actual comparison was to projected growth. Many outlets presented the ministry's misinformation as their objective reporting. For example, PBS explained that the ministry is staffed by medical professionals. The United Independent Experts view its figures as a reliable count of casualties. Israel's offensive has destroyed vast areas of Gaza, displacing around 90% of the population, and caused a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Adding, Israel's offensive and its blockade have gutted Gaza's health system, with several hospitals shutting down and others only partially functioning. Again, there is no call here to Hamas. Give up the hostages, and let's have an end to this. Return the hostages, the dead, the living. And the military campaign would end instantly. It would have to, because the Israeli people would absolutely demand it. And once again, Israel is a democracy. The government there does not dare defy the public will. It will fall if it does. What proof do you have of that? History. Look at the history of Israeli governments. When they lose public support, they crash. In a way, a parliamentary system is actually more responsive than what we have here in America. Elections can be held at any time. Jaundiced by radical ideologies and anti-Semitism, and empowered by Hamas misdirection, at least 38 countries, the EU's second-ranking official, the International Criminal Court, those criminals, and 14 members of Congress and many others accuse Israel of genocide. If Joseph Goebbels had Hamas propagandists on his side, we might all be shouting Heil Hitler. In November, a UN Special Committee found Israel's operations in Gaza consistent with genocide. Starvation as a weapon of war. Again, when Israel distributes food aid in Gaza, they give it away. It's given away for free to the people who need it. Hamas does not do this. When they distribute food aid, it is sold to the Palestinians, the starving Palestinians. Who's their real friend? The people who give them food, or the people who sell them food when they have nothing to pay with anyway? Amazing. Last month, the UN dishonestly announced that Gaza met 2 of the 3 criteria for famine. To reach that conclusion, the UN, which has battered Israel for years, rigged the numbers. It is astonishing to me the level to which anti-Semitism has risen in the 21st century. When the turn of the century happened a few years ago, I had the idea, well, maybe there'll be some things happen that we don't like and some troubles here and there. After all, it wasn't, September 11th, 2001, that was really the opening gun of the 21st century, wasn't it? It came, obviously, 9 months into the year, 9 months into the century. But that was really the thing that started the 21st century off with a bang. You should pardon the expression. But even then, in the aftermath of that, if somebody had said, well, what do you really fear in the future? A rising wave of anti-Semitism would not have occurred to me. I wouldn't have had that thought. And yet, where are we? Telephone numbers 831-265-5050, 831-265-5050. And as I look over stories that are coming out of Gaza and the Mideast, the one thing that I keep asking myself, why doesn't Hamas release the hostages? Obviously, they do not want peace, because releasing the hostages would bring about peace instantly. That's the imperative thing to understand for Evan and for everybody else. If the hostages are released, the war ends instantly. Now, for that reason, those of us who are rather hawkish on the subject, people like me, this is going to sound a bit Machiavellian, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. I'm actually glad that Hamas is not releasing the hostages. Well, how can you say that, Charles? That sounds kind of bloodthirsty. Well, in a way it is. As long as Hamas holds the hostages, the Israelis will continue to hunt them down and eliminate their war materials and kill or capture their fighters. So if you want Hamas destroyed, if you believe Hamas is an evil terror organization dedicated to killing the Jews, as we just heard that clown a few minutes ago saying, if this is how you see Hamas, and this is, if your vision is clear, this is what you see, then you want them gone because they're a scourge on the face of the earth. And the only thing right now that is keeping the effort going, the only thing that is keeping the Israeli Defense Forces hunting down Hamas, is the fact that the hostages are being held. Sounds cold-blooded, doesn't it? Well, you think I'm cold-blooded? Check out Hamas sometime. Why in the world would they do this? Certainly, you must understand the truth of what I'm saying. If Hamas were to return the hostages today, the war would end. But Hamas isn't doing that. So, put on your logical hat. If Hamas could end the war by returning the hostages, yet Hamas does not return the hostages, then what can we conclude? Answer: we can conclude that Hamas does not want the war to end. Wow. That's kind of hard to wrap your neurons around, but it must be true. Because if Hamas has the capacity right now to end the war, return the hostages, the war ends instantly. And yet they do not do that. Why? I don't claim to know the answer to that. I think one possibility is that they see they are winning a propaganda war. They see that people like Evan are doubting the motives of the Israeli forces. They see Israeli forces, these people are determined to destroy Gaza and to kill all the Palestinians. Well, if that were the case, there's 2 million Palestinians right now in Gaza, right? The Israelis have been running an effort in Gaza for 2 years now? If their stated goal was to exterminate the Palestinian people, well, all I can say is there'd be a hell of a lot more corpses right now than there are. Because we're talking about, for the most part, unarmed civilians. Most Palestinians don't belong to Hamas. They are used by Hamas as cannon fodder, pawns, whatever you want to say. They're brutally exploited by Hamas, but they're not members, and they certainly aren't given weaponry. No, Hamas keeps all that for themselves. They understand there have even been demonstrations by Palestinians in Gaza, thousands of them demonstrating against Hamas. Get them out of here. We don't want them. They're killing us. So if Hamas does not want the war to end, I submit that possibly one of the reasons why is because they feel that they're winning a propaganda victory. People who normally would not embrace the cause of bloodthirsty, genocidal terrorists are now embracing the cause of bloodthirsty, genocidal terrorists. The world is being lied to on an industrial strength scale, and a sufficient number are accepting those lies to make it worthwhile for Hamas to continue the war. Therefore, they continue to hold the hostages because it benefits them. Now, once again, this isn't attractive reasoning. It makes Hamas out to be pretty bloodthirsty, but then again, well, that's kind of who they are. But again, I point out that the logic here actually holds up. Now, I don't claim certain knowledge here. These are deductions and inferences that I've made. There could be another reason why Hamas decides to hold the hostages. All I know is that this entire conflict could end instantly if Hamas were to return the hostages, both the living and the dead. The war would end because Israel could not continue it. Could not. If the hostages were returned, the Israeli people would rejoice. And regardless of whether Hamas still continued to exist or not, the Israeli people would accept the return of their hostages, they would claim victory, and they would end their campaign. And they would compel their government to do precisely that. So even if you are one of those who thinks that Benjamin Netanyahu is some bloodthirsty warmonger who wants to hunt Hamas down to the last man, and frankly, I think Netanyahu thinks very clearly. He would like to hunt Hamas down to the last man, just as I would like to. I don't want this war to end until Hamas is absolutely defeated. Just like Hitler, or rather Churchill and Roosevelt met early in their cooperation World War II, and they agreed that the goal must be unconditional surrender. There would be no peace made with the Third Reich or with National Socialism. No treaty drawn up with Hitler's government. No, it had to be utterly and thoroughly defeated. And indeed, that is the way you make sure that Nazism does not rise again. It has to be beaten. If Hamas is not thoroughly beaten, they will rise again. And frankly, that's in the cards. The October 7th terror attack? The question, I hate to say this, but the question is, when is that atrocity going to be repeated? And will Hamas the next time attempt to make it on an even grander scale? More horrifying, more brutal. When you think about what was done to people, what, 12 to 1,500 people butchered in a single day? Women raped, babies smashed against walls, people set on fire. I mean, it's just the kind of thing that if you saw it in a slash movie, you wouldn't believe it. Unbelievable. And yet real. And we know because the kind-hearted Hamas terrorists recorded their deeds so that they could be exhibited on the internet. They're proud of that. So once again, if you want peace in the Middle East, and peace is always a worthwhile goal, then your calls should be, Hamas, release the hostages. Instant peace. But they don't do it. And the next time you look at that situation, before you go to this knee-jerk position of blaming Israel, think about the fact that Hamas holds hostages, they won't release them, and think about why. Again, I've advanced a few ideas of my own. I don't pretend to know why not. I just know what I see. Hamas keeps the war going by continuing to hold the hostages. That is a fact. So if you don't like the war, and if you want it to end, the ball is in Hamas court. All they have to do is release the hostages, and no more war. Okay, I have got a phone call. Let's go ahead and do that before we do the bottom of the hour break. I'd rather hear from one of my callers. This is Mark. Hello, sir. Welcome. Good to hear from you.
Hi, Charlie. You got to take a look at, through history, what has the two entities, Israel and Palestine, contributed to the world. And Israel has contributed 13 Nobel Prize winners. I mean, these are not Jewish prize winners. I mean, these are Israeli citizens who have won the Nobel Prize. Palestine, didn't they give, what's-his-face, Arafat a Nobel Prize? I think that's it.
Yeah, that was a travesty, an absolute travesty. Here's where you have a bloodthirsty terrorist who squirreled away billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, and he gets a Nobel Peace Prize. That is that is a moment of shame for that organization, eternal shame.
But 13 Israelis have won the Nobel Prize. You look at what Israel as a nation has contributed to the world. And, with China right now, it's very important in the United States. Israel is a big source of our generic pharmaceuticals. They have a huge pharmaceutical industry, and they are starting to replace a lot of what China is producing. And we're very dependent upon China for pharmaceutical, active ingredients or the entire pharmaceutical product. Unfortunately, including fentanyl. But Israel's a big source on that. In the ag world, we use a lot of Israeli-produced crop protection materials. Either, again, the entire product or the active ingredient. We are dependent on Israel on drip irrigation technology and materials. So Israel contributes a lot to the world. Palestine has contributed terrorists. They've taken airliners, they've taken buses, they've taken hostages, they've blown up buildings all through the world and affecting quite a few Americans, killing a lot of Americans. And I think that has to be taken into account. I mean, their history is not that great. I can't think of one accomplishment of the Palestinian society that's been to a benefit of the world and to America.
Unfortunately, if you have a society that bends its entire energy toward making war, and that essentially is what Hamas has inflicted on the Palestinians in Gaza, and there are those who make the point that, well, most of the Palestinians aren't Hamas. Yes, but when there was an election held in Gaza, Hamas drew the support. And, in the West Bank, the other area of Palestinian control, the PLO holds authority there. They won't hold elections. And the reason why is because they know that Hamas would defeat them. So the hearts of the Palestinian people really lie with this genocidal organization. And only a tiny number of them have gotten to the point where they're willing to say, no, we don't want to live like that. We don't want to dedicate our lives to hate and terror. I mean, these are people who strap explosives to their 5-year-old children and send them into pizza parlors or train stations or anywhere where there are a lot of Jews. I mean, I can't remember who it once was who said, when the Palestinians love their children more than they hate the Jews, then we will have some peace.
Yeah, and again, if I was going to move somewhere in the world, and if I was a woman, if I was non-Muslim, I would not move to Palestine. I'd move to Israel. It'd be much more welcome. And, there are Muslims doing very well in Israel. There are women doing very well in Israel. But Palestine, if you don't fit the criteria that's acceptable, you're going to be discriminated against.
Or worse.
Yeah, or worse. Hey, Liz, I was driving around last week listening, and you had a caller call in. You were talking about the immigration policy ongoing in the United States and the removal right now of quite a few illegal immigrants who came in during the Biden administration. And your caller suggested that there should be possible amnesty given to illegal immigrants who have gotten jobs, who fit in society, and aren't causing problems. And he thought they should maybe be given a blanket forgiveness on this and allowed to stay in the United States. And you disagreed with them. You think those 14 million that came in should, uninvited, should, leave. And I invite the caller to look up the history of the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, which happened during the Reagan administration. And they did that. They said, okay, we have a large population of illegal immigration. Let's allow those who have functioned well in society to remain here And that Simpson, Missouri was a total disaster. And it kind of was catalyst to the breakdown of our immigration policy here in the United States. But I remember during Simpson, Missouri, the millions and millions of people who were allowed to stay, and how they said, well, we have no way of tracking when they came in, what they've been doing, if they've been good or bad, and they huge numbers were allowed to remain. And then I was working ag at that time in Salinas at the immigration office. They said, they're going to cater to the farm worker groups, and giving them a tolerance for their immigration status. And that office had thousands lined up of people from India. And, stating, well, we were working on the local farms. We're kind of, well, no, we don't recognize these folks. But again, the fellow who called last week and stated, well, we should just grant amnesty to those who came, not causing problems, obeying the rules. Well, we tried that, and it did not work very well.
I remember Simpson, Missouri, and I remember it differently. The real problem, there were two parts to Simpson, Missouri. One you've described. It was essentially an amnesty for people who had entered the country illegally but had been productive members of society once they got here. The other was, okay, from here on, we're going to have absolute border security. We're not going to get back into this same situation again. This is supposed to be a one-time fix, but now we're going to close the border and maintain border integrity and not get ourselves back into this situation again. Well, as you pointed out, the amnesty part got done. That actually happened. But the other part, the border security, never got done. And this was the tragedy of Simpson, Missouri, in my thought, because what we did was we indulged in a fix that could be justified as a one-time fix, provided we followed through on the policy not to get in the same situation, but we did not.
You're very correct on that. Yeah, the border enforcement did not occur. The only thing on the first part, on the amnesty, there was so much fraud, and there was no way to check on the relevancy of these people stating, hey, I've been here for 10 years and been a perfect citizen. So both parts had issues, but you're totally correct. The border control part never occurred, but there was tremendous amount of fraud in the other part also.
Well, in anything like this, you're going to have people who are trying to get away with something. But if you have people who've indulged in criminal activity, you've got fingerprints on record, and you can check fingerprints, and that's pretty definite. So you can find out if somebody's been indulging in illegal behavior.
Well, the big issue is people come up the immigration office and say, I've been here 10 years. And they came here last week, and there was no way to check on the records on that had they been here 10 years or not.
I understand.
So that was the fraud that was taking place.
I understand, and you're right.
But,
that's just one of those. That's just nature of the beast.
Anyhow, I honor Ronald Reagan. I think this was his one faux pas that occurred during this.
Well, that was right at the end that was right at the end of his second term. So he signed that bill and then left office, and the breakage was on the Bush and Clinton administrations. He depended on them to enact these policies, and they never did.
Very correct. But I invite your caller, look up Simpson, Missouri, and see when this was tried in the past, and it was a total failure. Thank you for your time, Charlie.
Appreciate the call. Have yourself a great day. Okay, I did delay the commercial message for that, so let's go ahead and get that done right now. I will be back in 2 minutes. If you would like to be our next caller, I would be enthralled. 831-265-5050 is the number.
It's hot up here. Hi, folks. Warren Knox here of Knox Roofing. Yes, it really does get hot up here, but it's okay because Knox team has been sweating it out on rooftops for 30 summers to make certain your roof will keep you warm and dry through the winter. If you have any doubt about your roof will weather the winter, call Knox Roofing today and ask about a free rooftop inspection. We love it up here. 461-0634. Thanks, folks.
You need a clean, pleasant space to conduct business, but you don't want the burden of a long, expensive lease. Your solution is Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Satellite offers private offices, meeting and conference rooms, even co-working by the hour, day, week, or month. Schedule a tour at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
Get ready to help build one of America's first local news and talk streaming radio stations. SantaCruzVoice.com. How do you do it? By donating either your time, money, or both. You'll be helping the Voice team construct a powerful infrastructure, one that we can all be proud of. To donate your time, your money, or both, go to SantaCruzVoice.com and click Support. SantaCruzVoice.com and click Support.
It's high time to celebrate the opening of the new Hook Outlet Dispensary, 1129 Mission in Santa Cruz. Get in on the opening fun and really low prices on the Hook's unmatched selection of top-quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlet is now the West Side's source for finest cannabis at the lowest prices. Get in on all the opening fun and low prices at the all-new Hook Outlet. HookOutlet.com for details and deals.
And we're back live at, 10:48? Yeah, 10:48. Still time for your phone call before the top of the hour, or, of course, if you wish to wait until the third hour, you can do that, too. The telephone number is the same for either hour, 831-265-5050. There's a little editorial today that I'd like to share with you. It's titled, A Politician Speaks the Unspeakable. Speaks the unspeakable. My God, what is he saying? Is he some politically correct something? Well, no, this is no racial or sexual crudity. Those obstacles to politics were breached long ago. We're referring to something far more taboo in modern Western democracies. Admitting that the size of the modern welfare state is no longer affordable. Friedrich Merz, Chancellor of Germany, said at a party conference, his Christian Democratic Union, his political party, the welfare state that we have today can no longer be financed with what we produce in the economy. Encore. The welfare state that we have today can no longer be financed with what we produce in the economy. Thank you, Chancellor, for this burst of candor. Mr. Merz is doing what no one else in the top ranks of Western politicians seems willing to do, which is broach the fundamental dilemma of the modern West. Nations have built welfare and entitlement states that are so large, they've outstripped the ability of slow-growing economies to pay for them. Yet because the entitlement cushion is so broad and reaches deep into the middle class, it's become nearly impossible to reform. This is true among conventional politicians of the left and right. But it's also true of the supposed radicals of the populist right, from Marine Le Pen in France to Nigel Farage in the United Kingdom, the AfD in Germany, and Donald Trump. The populists dodge difficult reforms of the broken welfare state. They campaign against immigration or foreign trade, but they won't tell voters the truth about the benefits government provides that are driving ever higher deficits and debt, along with slower economic growth. Thus the importance of Mr. Merz's comments, which weren't extensive, but at least broke the taboo. The dilemma is coming into sharper view in Germany because of the Merz government's breakthrough on national defense. He and his coalition partners agreed to break deficit spending limits to pass a military buildup to meet the rising threat from Russia. This is necessary to meet NATO obligations after so many years of neglect in favor of stressing entitlements. As France and America have shown, there's no more difficult challenge in politics than reforming government handouts, whether in pensions, jobless benefits, government health care, or income subsidies. It'll be worth watching what Mr. Merz and his coalition propose, but the first step toward solving the problem is admitting it exists. Here in America, this problem did not come into existence until the 1930s. The Great Depression and the havoc it wrought were the second greatest disaster, traumatic disaster ever to befall this country. The first, of course, was the Civil War. There's no way that's ever going to be eclipsed as a national trauma. And we have the dead bodies to prove it. But good heavens, look what we lost in the Great Depression. For one thing, the Depression lasted twice as long as the Civil War. And duration of trauma is an important thing. It makes a difference. How long are you subjected to agony? If agony lasts a year, that's bad. If it lasts 2 years, that's worse. If it lasts 10 years, that's excruciating. And the Great Depression did last a full decade. Possibly just a whisker more, certainly no less. We no longer have people among us who lived through those years. Many of us today never had an intimate conversation with anybody who had. Me, I'm old enough to where my parents, my grandparents, people I knew well, people I grew up with, and just as World War II was a formulative event of my life, so was the Great Depression, even though I came along after both had been endured. What happened in that Great Depression? The fundamental American wall between what is the public domain and what is the private domain. That wall was breached. And once breached, it was never re-erected. And frankly, I don't think it was even possible to re-erect it. Once people, even a small number of people, at the start, get the idea that somehow the government is responsible for their well-being. Once that happens, you've started down a particular path. You put something new into the country's political mix, something that had never been there before. And of course, once there, like anything else, it begins to spread. Sometimes slowly, as in the Eisenhower years, when really there was no effort made to promote this type of thought. But then a Lyndon Johnson comes along. Remember earlier in the program we were talking about political animals, people whose entire life was politics? How about Lyndon Johnson? If you ever want a scary read, forget Edgar Allan Poe and those cats. Pick up Robert Caro's biography of Lyndon Johnson. It's exhaustive. Caro is, I've got 2 volumes in the house. The first volume covers his early life and his early political service in the House of Representatives. The second volume covers his years in the U.S. Senate. He was in the Senate for 12 years, during which he rather rapidly rose to become Democratic floor leader, majority leader, and was incredibly powerful and influential in that position. Indeed, that's why he was a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1960. He was the primary opposition to John F. Kennedy. Of course, Kennedy defeated him and then put him on the ticket. Smart move, unify the party. It turned out to be as disastrous as Lincoln's choice of Andrew Johnson to be vice president. But you take a guy like Lyndon Johnson in the presidency, and he embraces and runs with this idea of making more and more people dependent on the federal government. And the damage he does doesn't concern him. You take poor people, particularly in minority communities, and tell them, look, as long as you've got a breadwinner in the household, as long as you've got a man who can go out, get a job and work, you're not eligible for these payments. But if you throw the guy out, become a single mother, all of a sudden, we've got money for you. That's government actively promoting the breakup of family units. The single strongest bond that we have in our culture, in our civilization. And it's hammering at the very foundation of it. Wow, what could go wrong? Today we're in a position where, as, Mitt Romney pointed out in 2012, he was actually caught on mic saying, well, gosh, something like 53% of the American people are drawing some kind of a government check. So how in the world do you beat that? And he was roundly criticized for that. Oh, that's a terrible thing for you to say. Well, nobody bothered saying that it wasn't true. They said it was terrible to say, but nobody said it wasn't true. Did you ever notice that? I remember. And that brings us back to this little editorial today in the Wall Street Journal, thanking the German Chancellor for actually saying that the welfare state that we have today can no longer be financed with what we produce in the country. In other words, we're on a path to insolvency. That's Germany. We have the same problem right here at home. And any politician who comes forward and says, I'm going to do something about it, is defeated and thrown out of office. The last one was Paul Ryan. He's in private life now because he was serious about addressing this problem. Donald Trump has pledged never to do so. And so far, he's kept his word. It's 11 o'clock at Santa Cruz Voice. Back in 6 minutes. Once again, it's time to start another hour. 11:06 here at Santa Cruz Voice. I'm Charles Freedman. Hour number 3 of today's program. We've had some really interesting callers today. Perhaps you'd like to be one during this third hour. 831-265-5050 is the number. Plenty of time for you. Love to hear from you. Okay, we've got, I've still got, obviously, the things that callers have said today going through my head. And in particular, Evan's presentation, which was kind of frustrating in a way, because on the one hand, he wants an end to the killing. He wants, peace to break out. And how can any rational person argue with that? So obviously, we agree on that. But at the same time, when I asked him, hey, what should Israel do? And he didn't have an answer for me. And the one thing that I've come up with, and I've said, if Hamas would release their hostages, Evan and I would get our way. There'd be peace. So when I come on this program and I say every single act of violence that's going on in Gaza right now, you can put down to Hamas. I mean it. They are the ones who are keeping the war going. Now, there's another war going on in the world right now, and that's the one between Ukraine and Russia. And in that one, once again, you ask the question, who is keeping the war going? And the answer comes roaring back. Vladimir Putin. He's the one who's keeping the war going. And we talked a few minutes ago in Israel, a kind of a contradiction on the part of some people who are saying, well, we want the hostages back, but we're upset with the things the Israeli Defense Forces are doing to get the hostages back. And Hamas will not give the hostages back, so the only way to get them is to essentially go in and get them. And that's what's causing all the hate and discontent. So I submit that, those people who are saying, I want the hostages back, but I don't want the IDF doing what it's doing, well, there's a contradiction there, because without the IDF doing what it's doing, you don't get the hostages back. Unless you put pressure on Hamas, unless you literally coerce them, force them to give up hostages, they don't do that. And the fact is that right now they are not. So is there a contradiction in the Ukraine war? Possibly. A durable peace in Ukraine could be one of President Trump's most consequential achievements, but getting there is all the tougher when his administration undermines his own position. He was right late last week inventing that President Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. Yet, is his administration doing much differently? Just yesterday was a front page headline that the Pentagon was denying to Ukraine the right to use missiles that they had to strike deep into Russia, to hit military and economic targets there and bring the war home to the enemy. Mr. Biden's anxieties about escalation and reluctance to offer weapons contributed to the locked battlefield. Mr. Trump's criticism clearly suggests the U.S. might now take the gloves off and let Ukraine use more American long-range missiles to hit more targets deep in Russia. Such a warning would put pressure on Mr. Putin to sit down at the negotiating table if Putin thinks that this is credible. But the Journal reported Friday that Mr. Trump's Pentagon is preventing Ukraine from using U.S. Army tactical missile system for precisely such long-range strikes. Ukraine's defenders, such as President Biden, are losing the battle in the U.S. bureaucracy. The Defense Department veto appears to be the latest masterwork of Elbridge Colby, Pentagon strategy chief. Mr. Colby was also reportedly behind a pause in U.S. weapons shipments this summer that took Mr. Trump by surprise. Interesting. Listeners to this program will not be surprised by this. When this news was broken, I remember making the point, perhaps it was Hegseth who's responsible for this. Evidently one of his minions, Mr. Colby. But the whole idea being that somebody in the Pentagon is sabotaging the president's efforts with regard to Ukraine. And evidently Mr. Colby has the idea that by appeasing Vladimir Putin, we can somehow arrive at a good outcome. Mr. Trump has been disabused of that notion. And if there is still a person in the Pentagon who harbors those thoughts, that person should lose his job for being irrational. You do not want irrational people running policy. That's a bad thing. Who knows what they might do? They might actually tie the hands of our own allies as they seek to defend themselves. Mr. Colby recently stepped on the president's pledge that the U.S. would assist with security guarantees. Mr. Colby's message to a group of European allies, forget it. Who's on first here regarding U.S.-Ukraine policy? Is Mr. Trump running the show? Or is it Vice President Vance's man at the Pentagon? The Russians, meantime, are underscoring their intransigence. Foreign Minister Lavrov, oh, isn't he a prince? Took to American television over the weekend to decline a direct meeting between Zelensky and Putin. He issued his usual demands and once more implied that Zelensky isn't Ukraine's legitimate leader. The ballyhooed Alaska summit seems to have come to nothing, except that it let Mr. Putin stave off further sanctions pressure. Mr. Trump now says he needs another 2 weeks to figure out what to do. He puts the onus on both sides. I'll see whose fault it is. We're going to see whether or not they have a meeting. This same error was captured in Mr. Vance's interview on NBC this weekend. We're trying to negotiate as much as we can with both the Russians and Ukrainians and find a middle ground to stop the killing. We're effectively mediating. How much more evident can it be that Russia is the obstacle to peace? Yeah, at what point do you acknowledge that you have been hit on the head with a 2x4? Mr. Putin's intent is to wipe out a relatively free and Western neighbor whose existence threatens his vision of a greater Russia. What is the compromise position for that project? That's the question. What is the compromise position there? How much do you throw to the conqueror in hope that then he'll be satisfied? Was appeasement is throwing something to a crocodile hoping he'll eat you last? How much more evident can it be? What's the compromise position? It won't be settled by choosing parcels of land to swap. At this point, President Trump can certainly tell his voters that he tried mightily to talk Mr. Putin into peace. The effort has failed. The next strategy, one that has worked for Mr. Trump in other parts of the world, is called maximum pressure. The way Mr. Trump can end this war is by getting Putin to conclude that the costs are too high for him to continue. And what is Mr. Putin demanding in Ukraine? One of his non-negotiable demands. Well, he wants Donetsk. Now, what is Donetsk? Well, if you look at the map, you'll find that that's east-central Ukraine. And this particular area is one that is on the front line of the invasion. Mr. Putin's troops occupy most of Donetsk right now. Something like 75% of it. But what about the remainder? Mr. Putin is demanding that that be ceded to him also. An uninformed person might be tempted to say, oh, well, he's already got 3/4 of it, may as well give him the rest. But there's more to it than that. That other part of Donetsk has great strategic importance. Vladimir Putin's demand that Ukraine cede territory the Russians haven't even managed to conquer may seem audacious, but it's actually a sign of weakness. Mr. Putin doesn't have the power to take it by force. Russia wants the entire region of Donetsk, including the 25% that Ukraine still controls, an unoccupied swath larger than the state of Delaware. Remember, Ukraine, although it's much smaller than Russia, is itself a fairly big country. I think it's larger than Texas. A heavily reinforced defensive line, known as the Fortress Belt, has stopped the Russians from rolling deeper westward, and Ukraine has no plans to surrender the area. In other words, this is their defensive line. And it has been holding for months and months and months. So this is a defensive line that has real power. Ukraine began strengthening this 31-mile belt more than a decade ago. The Russians have lost men and weapons whenever they bash themselves against it. Penetrating it by force would take years, according to the Institute for the Study of War. So Mr. Putin intends to seek it through negotiations instead. Ukraine knows the consequences of allowing itself to be stripped of its strength. Under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, Kiev surrendered its nuclear arsenal in exchange for security guarantees from the U.S., the United Kingdom, and Russia. Those promises were worthless. They failed to deter Mr. Putin's 2014 and 2022 invasions. Putin has been ruthless in past dealings. Here's one I had forgotten about. In 2014, he promised a humanitarian corridor to save surrounded Ukrainian soldiers in the eastern city of Ilovaisk. Ukrainian troops laid down their arms, whereupon they were ambushed and massacred. The Kremlin justifies its aggression in part by claiming Moscow has an obligation to protect Ukraine's Russian-speaking population. But the prevalence of Russian language in Ukraine is itself a legacy of centuries of oppression. In the Soviet era, Moscow banned Ukrainians' mother tongue in schools, workplaces, and government. This was called Russification, and it wasn't just practiced in Ukraine. In Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, native languages were suppressed. In Central Asian Soviet republics, the idea was all of the Soviet Union had to be Russified. And if there's any clearer proof of the fact that the Soviet Union was merely the Russian Empire wearing a red mask, that would have to be it. But the Soviet, under Stalin, had actually led Russia to a tremendous extension of its power and reach. And in Russia, of course, power is measured by square miles. Imagine their heartbreak when it all fell apart. Russia followed communism, the god that failed. And when it failed, of course, Russia lost her colonial possessions. Kind of like, when World War II ended, the British lost their colonial possessions, despite the fact that they hadn't been defeated in the war. Nevertheless, the time came when the British Empire came to an end. Russia is the last great empire on the face of the globe. People said it was the British. No. The Russian Empire. And Mr. Putin is seeking to extend its life once again. No one actually believes the Russians will stop. Why should they? Ukraine's post-Soviet descendants can take Mr. Putin at his word when he talks about his objectives and intentions. They've concluded that territorial concessions will whet his appetite rather than satisfying it. The only way to stop the Russians is physically. Ukrainians refuse to be pressured into a quick but unstable peace. 78% of Ukrainians reject the idea of a deal that yields unoccupied territory to Russia, according to a poll published this summer by the Kiev Institute of Sociology. Another worry is that the U.S. might seek to coerce Ukraine into concessions. American intelligence plays a crucial role in Ukraine's defense, among other things, by providing early warnings of incoming attacks. American Patriots are the only way of countering Russian ballistic missiles. Without them, Russia can better target civilians and Ukraine's fighter jets, defense industrial base, energy infrastructure, and other high-priority targets. Would a loss of key U.S. operational support force Kiev to accept a bad peace predicated on Russian conditions? Americans are really a huge help, said Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to Russian President Zelensky. Without the U.S. support, it would get tough, but that doesn't mean Ukraine will exit the war. If we were to stop, this would not mean a peace agreement. This would mean a capitulation that would be followed by a mass genocidal extermination. Other Ukrainians offer similar answers. This is why the Ukraine campaign is not admissible of an easy solution. Mr. Trump made a mistake when he ran around the campaign during the months of October and September, saying, "Well, that's I can settle that on day one." That was never a possibility. Mr. Trump, I think, was figuring that Putin was still the same Putin he was during his first administration. Putin is suffering from a degenerative condition. And I mean mentally degenerative. He's getting worse as time goes by. And indeed, we have seen this as basically the rule rather than the exception. Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, all of these dictators, over time, have grown more authoritarian, more brutal, more stubborn, more paranoid. These are conditions that always existed, but as the years pass, they become more and more pronounced. The 4 years that Mr. Trump was out of office, 4 momentous years for Vladimir Putin, during which, of course, he launched this current war, thinking that he would have a walkover. He expected a campaign that would last 2 or 3 weeks at the most. How red is his face? And this is, I think, our hope for victory in Ukraine. If we can raise the price higher and higher, if we can tighten the belt, tighten the noose around Russia's neck, we'll never be able to completely cut off their oil revenue. Cut off as much as we can. Seize their assets in the West. That's $300 billion that they can say, "Sio bloody nara" to. And use that money to fund the war. We can bring about conditions in Russia which will lead the people upon whom Putin depends for his power to cease regarding him as any kind of an asset and start regarding him as a liability. When that happens, we're close to the end. What if, in exchange for ceding unoccupied territory, the West commits to ensuring Russian aggression won't resume in the future? Europe is now considering a deterrent force known as a coalition of the willing that would include troops in Ukraine. Russia has repeatedly violated ceasefire agreements. There's no reason to believe it would honor another one. Some Ukrainians question whether, under fire, such a coalition would remain willing. If the West is going to go to war with Russia, why can the West not do it right now? If the West has no political will to do so, why do we think it will have the political will after Russia will break the next promise? If Kiev were to cede Donetsk, Ukrainian and European forces would be responsible for securing more than 2,000 miles of frontier. including the lines of contact on the borders with Russia and Belarus. But a recent report from the London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies details several difficulties Europe would have deploying large forces to Ukraine. Europe wants a U.S. backstop, but there's no indication the U.S. is willing to supply a force that is big and decisive, says Ukraine's former defense minister. If it's anything short, this will end with Russia concluding they can attack and have it be successful. Deterrence would be further weakened if Russia gained control of Donetsk, given that the loss of the fortress belt would put Ukrainian and European forces in a less defensible position. Russia would gain a prime outpost to threaten the neighboring regions of Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhia. The Ukrainians and their Western partners would have to rush to erect new fortifications, including on terrain that is less defensible. The next comparably advantageous defensive line is the Dnieper River, way further west. In other words, there are certain non-negotiables here. And the Donbass is one of them. I've often made comparisons between this crisis and the Munich crisis of 1938. Here, the similarities are almost overwhelming. The Russians claim, we have ethnic Russians here who are being mistreated. Hitler claimed, there are Germans in the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia who are being mistreated. The Germans were demanding something that they had not won through combat. Their demand for the Sudetenland was political. These poor Germans, we've got to protect them. But it was also military. It just so happened that Sudeten area was a mountainous region, well suited to defense, kind of like the fortress that Ukraine has built in the Donbass. A highly defensible military position. Well, of course, attacking highly defensible military positions is a good way to lose a lot of people, a lot of war material. Putin has found that out. He's been throwing men against that fortress wall in the Donbass for months and months, actually more than a couple of years now, and he hasn't broken it yet. So what do you do? Well, wasn't it Winston Churchill once who said, jaw is better than war? If you could talk your way into control of that area, rather than having to fight your way into it, well, that's better for you. But is it better overall? After all, he's the bad guy. Better for Hitler, better for Putin, is not a good thing. Mr. Putin pitches the surrender of Donetsk as a condition to end the war. Ukrainians know any such concession would enable Russian aggression and not end it. That is the simple fact of the matter. If an end to this conflict involves the cession of that particular defensive line, then it is a guarantee that all we are doing is seeing an intermission in the fighting, not a permanent peace. Mr. Trump, to his credit, has stated on more than one occasion he's interested in a permanent peace. Good. Good, so he should be. Well, perhaps the first step is firing Mr. Elbridge Colby, who is sabotaging his efforts from his position at the Pentagon. The president should not be elated to have his own efforts sabotaged from within his own administration. That's a firing offense. Back in 2 minutes.
The Santa Cruz County Fair opens Wednesday, September 10th with FMX Rampage at the Grandstand featuring Adam Jones, X-Game gold medalist, with his action team. Thursday, it's the Outlaw Mariachi. Friday, it's the White Album Ensemble. Saturday, Red returns, a Taylor Swift tribute band. And Sunday, the Chata Show, and that evening, Los Dinos. And our drone show at 9 o'clock each night. Pre-sale tickets and information at SantaCruzCountyFair.com.
The Santa Cruz County Fair.
When you need help escaping from an abusive relationship, call on the Angel.
Hello, I am attorney Angel Hess, and I am ready to help you. Whether you or a loved one needs legal protection from an abusive spouse, cohabitant, or neighbor, I will help you. I have over 7 years' experience working as a lawyer protecting others from abusive relationships.
Stop the abuse now. Call on the Angel, attorney Angel L. Hess at santacruzlegal.net.
Cannabis is one of nature's most beneficial plants. Hello, I'm Jenna. Treehouse Dispensary, we use information about cannabis to build community. Listen to Carly.
Thanks, Jenna. For those who wake up in the middle of the night, Treehouse suggests a THC CBN chocolate edible blend like Sleepy Time from Sensi Chew. Sleep the night away.
For answers to your cannabis questions, ask your friends at Treehouse Dispensary, 3651 Soquel Drive in Soquel, or ourtreehouse.io.
What's your family eating for dinner? Chef Ben here at the Back 9 Grill and Bar, where you can pick up family dinner that feeds 4 to 6 hungry people. Family meals include a full rack of ribs, a whole smoked chicken, pound of pulled pork, and plenty of barbecue sauce. Served with a full quart of baked beans, coleslaw, macaroni and cheese, dinner rolls, pickles, a side of onions, and for dessert, brownies with a pint of Mary Ann's vanilla ice cream. Call and order your family's dinner about 15 minutes before you want to eat. See you at the 9.
Time is 11:32. I'm Charles Freedman. We have just under half an hour remaining in today's program, which is plenty of time for your telephone call. So make it now. 831-265-5050 is the telephone number. In the first hour, I shared a little bit of a piece from The Atlantic in which one of their authors was decrying Donald Trump's flirtation with socialism in his industrial policy, his taking of government shares of ownership in companies like U.S. Steel and Intel. This is a terrible, terrible idea, and one which people on the right should push back against with all of their might and vigor. Donald Trump on this one is dead wrong, as evidenced by the fact that he is being applauded by Bernie Sanders. When you're getting kind words out of Bernie Sanders, it's time to check yourself, because you're moving in the wrong direction. Okay. That same piece, bear in mind this was in the Atlantic, which is a leftist publication. Well, that same piece criticized Mr. Trump for using his authority to attempt to end mail-in voting. Well, frankly, I think this is a different issue, and one in which a different approach is warranted. I look in the Federalist today. President Trump announced on Truth Social last week his intention to sign an executive order banning mail-in voting ahead of the 2026 election. Now, the only problem I have with this, it needs to be legislation, because that executive order can and will be rescinded by the next Democrat who sits in the White House. And it is unfortunate that this has become a partisan issue, because as recently as 2004, I guess it was, when we had, I mentioned several times, the Commission on Elections that was put together by President George W. Bush. And its most illustrious member was former President Jimmy Carter, a Democrat. And there were plenty of other prominent Democrats on that committee. This was a serious, honest-to-God, bipartisan, blue-ribbon commission. And among their unanimous findings, unanimous, I might add, among their unanimous findings was that mail-in voting was the most vulnerable to fraudulent practice. Mr. Trump seeks to suppress it. And it should be suppressed. At that time, when this report was issued, there was no state that had elections conducted by mail. This is one of those new ideas that comes along every once in a while. People, oh, it's a new idea, it must be great. Ranked choice voting, it's a new idea, must be great. I'm sorry. Many new ideas are not that great. There's a reason the old ideas get old. There's a reason they hang around long enough to get old. It's because they actually make sense and work well. But then, unfortunately, they acquire the patina of age. And there are always so many people in the population ready to say, oh, that's just the old way of doing things. We need something new. Even if something new turns out to be either a step down at best or at worst an unmitigated disaster. The reality is that mail-in voting is the least secure method of casting a ballot in the United States. Unlike in-person voting, where safeguards such as voter ID are standard and supported by a majority of people, mail-in ballots are susceptible to fraud, misdelivery, and errors. Ballots can be intercepted and fraudulently cast, lost in transit, or even altered without the voter's knowledge. In addition, signature verification is far from foolproof. States that have widely implemented mail-in voting, such as Nevada, California, and Colorado, have experienced chronic delays in counting ballots, sometimes taking days or even weeks to finalize results. This is nonsense. These delays create uncertainty, undermine public confidence, and provide fertile ground for disputes and legal challenges. California took 38 days after the November election to certify results, with about 81% of the votes being by mail. In Nevada, mail ballots sent by Election Day can still be counted if they arrive up to 4 days afterward, a rule that extended the timeline for final results in 2020. I mean, this is really simple. The only way you get a mail-in ballot, it's called an absentee ballot. If you are going to be out of the country or away from your precinct on Election Day, you can get an absentee ballot. I'm not interested in disfranchising anybody. If you are a shut-in at a nursing home or something, you can get an absentee ballot. But for 81% of the votes in an election to be cast by mail is ridiculous. And the idea that ballots can still be counted if they arrive after Election Day is nonsense. Election Day ends 8 p.m. Tuesday night, at which point you start counting. And you should be finished within 24 hours. You know, it's interesting. I've talked occasionally about Florida. Florida being the inspiration for that election panel that Mr. Bush put into existence. Florida back in 2000 was a mess. They had an election that was extremely close, where literally every ballot counted, and all of a sudden you had the butterfly ballots and hanging chads and this and that and the other damn fool thing, and it was just ghastly. The governor of Florida at that time was Jeb Bush. And I give him credit for this. After that election, he went to his legislature and said, we have become a national laughingstock. Our election procedures have been held up to examination in front of the country, and we have been made to look foolish. That can't happen. We need to reform our election procedures. And under Governor Bush's leadership, Florida passed and he signed a series of election laws that tightened up procedures, generalized procedures, made things more transparent. In this particular case, something new was an improvement because the something old had demonstrably failed. If the something old demonstrably fails, then obviously something new is necessary. Today, Florida, one of the biggest states, Florida has the third largest number of votes of any state, more than New York. Today, Florida gets its votes counted lickety-split. I remember last election night, by midnight local time here, Florida was in. I think maybe it was even earlier than that. And this huge number of votes, millions and millions of votes, All counted, all certified, bing, bang, boom, done. Don't tell me it isn't possible. If Florida can do it, so can any other state. This is the model we should look to. Battleground states such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin have encountered significant challenges with mail-in voting. In Pennsylvania, last-minute changes and a surge in mail-in voting during the 2020 election caused extended deadlines and legal challenges regarding ballot receipt and counting procedures that lasted years. Similarly, Michigan experienced delays in counting mail-in ballots. Wisconsin had issues with absent ballot verification and processing, leading to concerns about the accuracy and integrity of the count. Democrats, however, have increasingly weaponized mail-in voting as a tool to win elections. By pushing expansive mail-in voting programs without sufficient safeguards, they create opportunities for procedural confusion, ballot mishandling, and in some cases outright fraud. These actions do not promote access. Rather, they erode trust in our electoral system and disproportionately affect competitive races where even a small number of disputed ballots can change outcomes. The case for banning mail-in voting is clear. Elections must be secure, transparent, and fair. While convenience is important, it can never come at the expense of integrity. In-person voting, with proper identification and procedural safeguards, ensures every vote is legitimate, every vote is verified, and the results are beyond reproach. Now, I understand the screams of anguish of county clerks around the country. That's who actually runs our election, 3,500 county elections officers. They said, well, having everybody vote in person, that's a tall order. We've got to staff these places, and we've got to have polling stations, etc. Well, one change that has been made that I find worthwhile, they actually have early voting now. And by that I don't mean, weeks early. That's nuts. But I will be quite honest with you. On the last election, I voted on Saturday. I did not wait for Tuesday. I voted in person. But it was more convenient to me to vote on the weekend than have to make time on a Tuesday to go down to the polling place and vote. This, in my mind, is perfectly permissible. It still means that at 8 p.m. on election night, the polls close for the final time, and at that point, all votes are counted. President Trump's executive order would be a bold step toward restoring confidence in our elections. By taking action to ban mail-in voting, he would not only protect the integrity of the vote, but would send a clear message. Election integrity matters. Americans deserve to know that when they cast their ballot, it will be counted accurately and fairly, without influence, delay, or doubt. As we look toward 2026, Trump's commitment to secure elections is pivotal. Running mail-in voting is not about restricting access. Banning mail-in voting is not about restricting access. It's about ensuring that every vote is real, every outcome is legitimate, and our self-government remains protected. This is a fight we're supporting. I agree, and again, I call upon this particular article is written by John Findley. He's director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's National Election Protection Project. I would suggest, Mr. Findley, that to write an article or make a statement in favor of banning mail-in voting without citing the Carter Commission's finding is political malpractice. The most important single piece of evidence in this entire debate was provided years ago by a commission including several prominent Democrats, all of whom agreed that mail-in voting was the most vulnerable to fraud and other hanky-panky. Quote it. Make people aware of it, for gosh sakes. Otherwise, as I say, you're leaving one of your most potent arguments unmade. What else we got here? Oh, yeah, while I have a few minutes before the top of the hour, the local Republican women have sent me some notifications of upcoming events. Their coffee talks for September. They have two now. This idea has been received so well that they continue to have the one in Aptos at California Coffee, 9105 Soquel Drive. The next one will be Thursday, September 11th, from 10 to noon. And they now have one every month up in Scotts Valley. This is at the adorable French bakery, Old Malone's. They have it a week later. It's Thursday, September 18th, 10:30 to noon. And this is at 4402 Scotts Valley Drive. So the coffee talk idea, what is it? Well, it's just a time and a place, in this particular place, a local coffee shop, place where you can get something, a good hot drink and some nosh, where you can get together with a few other fellow conservatives, Republicans, etc., and simply enjoy the atmosphere of each other's company. There's no admission charge. You don't have to sign in. Incidentally, this is sponsored by the Republican women, but if you're a guy, don't get the idea that you can't come. Men and guests are always welcome. The more the merrier. There is strength in numbers in this particular case. And the idea of it is a very rational and reasonable one. In a in a county like ours, we're outnumbered as we are. To have a place to go where you have a few like-minded individuals around, can just kind of spread out a bit, has value. So, Coffee Talk, Aptos, Thursday, September 11th. Coffee Talk, Scotts Valley, Thursday, September 18th. I don't know how many young people listen to this program, probably not that many, but you might have kids in school. There's an organization going on right now. Turning Point USA is trying to start a local chapter. We're looking for conservative high school students. Give the kids in your family a shot at success. Strengthen your kids against the woke mob. Turning Point USA equips students with training in persuasion and organizational skills, gives them a place to speak freely, resist harmful pressures, and make trustworthy friends. I'm starting a TPUSA group in the Monterey Bay area. I need at least 2 other conservative high school students to get started. The more the better. Email. Okay. If you're interested in this, you're a high school student, you have a high school student. If you're interested in looking into joining Turning Point USA, here is the email address you need. Alan, that's ALAN, Katzman, KATZMAN, at iCloud.com. Okay, so again, that's Alan E. Katzman. Alan, ALAN, 1L, ALAN dot E. dot Katzman, KATZMAN, at iCloud.com. So I'm really hoping that this gets started. Turning Point USA seems like a really good place to get, to form some good associations. I can remember when I was a youngster, there was an organization called Young Americans for Freedom, which was essentially founded and promoted by William F. Buckley Jr. through his magazine, The National Review. And I and a few like-minded conservatives formed a chapter of YAF when I was in high school, and we were active on political campaigns, and we got to meet Ronald Reagan in 1966 when he was running for governor. We all went over to Santa Cruz and had fun, giving a big hoorah and carrying signs and everything, welcoming him to that campaign event. I'll never forget. This was what, in late 1965, I guess, maybe early 66, and there was a period of time that Reagan was going around California delivering political speeches. This is something he had been doing since the Goldwater campaign. Through 1965, he continued to do this. And there was a tremendous amount of speculation at that time. Is he going to run for governor? And of course, later on, obviously, it developed that he was, but this was the big question at that time. And we were at the old Riverside in Santa Cruz, and Reagan would be speaking that night. We were all out front to greet him, and he smiled and shook hands as he went by. And a few moments later, he poked his head out and came and he beckoned us all to him. And he put a hand up to his mouth and he says, "Actually, I'm going to do it. I just can't tell anybody yet." And then he went. So we all felt like we were in on a big secret there. And of course, it wasn't that much later, a couple of weeks, that he announced his candidacy for governor, and the rest is history. But by being in an organization like Turning Point USA, your child, or you if you're a high school kid, you might get some memories like that. And they stick with you. Believe me, they do. When you have an opportunity to meet somebody like Ronald Reagan and to hear them speak in person, it makes a difference. So once again, if you are a high school student, or if you are, or the parent of or something, if you're connected with some high school student, the email address you need is Alan, ALAN, Katzman, KATZMAN, at iCloud.com. Okay. 7 minutes left. Well, I just happened to spot this. I'm going to find out what it says along with you. America's lower judiciary is out of control. Neil Gorsuch is putting it on notice. He's the Supreme Court Justice, obviously. And in a Thursday order, the nation's highest court granted in part a request by the Trump administration to temporarily pause a lower court blockade on the National Institute of Health's bid to terminate DEI-related grants totaling nearly $800 million. The ruling was 5-4, with Chief Justice John Roberts and the court's Democratic appointees saying they would have denied the administration's application in full. Instead of the granting of stay was one of several instances in which the Supreme Court has been asked to weigh in on injunctions issued by left-wing district judges. Such orders have come at the request of Democratic activists seeking to disrupt the Trump administration in a judicial coup. In addition to signing on to the majority's Thursday decision, Justice Gorsuch penned a concurring opinion in which he ripped into the lower court judiciary's out-of-control behavior. He noted that lower court judges may sometimes disagree with the court's decisions. They are never free to defy them. Citing a related case recently before the court, Department of Education versus California, a Trump appointee highlighted how the High Court granted a stay in that case because it found the government likely to prevail in showing that the district court lacked jurisdiction to order the government to pay grant obligations. California explained that suits based on any express or implied contract do not belong in district court under the Administration Procedure Act, but in the court federal claims under the Tucker Act. Rather than follow that direction, the district court in this case permitted a suit involving material identical grants to proceed to final judgment under the APA, Gorsuch wrote. As support for its course, the district court invoked persuasive authority of dissents in California, and an earlier court appeals decision in California repudiated. That was error. Gorsuch went on to underscore that the promise of our legal system that like cases are treated alike means the lower court ought not to invoke the persuasive authority of a dissent or a reputed court of appeals decision to reach a different conclusion on an equivalent record. More to the point, he noted that the district court's apparent rebuke of the precedent very recently established by the Supreme Court in the California case is not an isolated incident among the lower courts. If the district court's failure to abide by California were a one-off, perhaps it would not be worth writing to address it. But 2 months ago, another district court tried to compel compliance with a different order that this court had stayed. Still another district court recently diverged from one of this court's decisions, even though the case at hand did not differ in any pertinent respect from the one this court had decided. So this is now the third time in a matter of weeks this court has had to intercede in a case squarely controlled by one of its precedents. Mr. Gorsuch concluded his concurrence by laying down a marker in the sand that regardless of their personal opinions, lower court judges are obligated to abide by Supreme Court guidance and existing constitutional framework. All these interventions should have been unnecessary, but together they underscore a basic tenet of our judicial system. Whatever their own views, justices are duty-bound to respect the hierarchy of the federal court system created by the Constitution and the Congress. Gorsuch was joined in his opinion by Brett Kavanaugh, who concurred in part and dissented in part, according to Thursday's order. So, Neil Gorsuch taking the opportunity to essentially dress down lower court judges who, well, I'm not going to say they don't get the message. They're not stupid. Of course they get the message. They don't want to get the message, and so they reject the message. And Mr. Gorsuch is making it clear you don't have that option. The Supreme Court of the United States is just that. The leading judicial authority. When it establishes a precedent, lower courts are bound by that precedent until such time as it may be changed. And precedents do get overturned from time to time. But it is obviously the exception rather than the rule. And to have Supreme Court justices running around having the idea that they can simply, or to have lower court justices running around having the idea that they are not bound by Supreme Court precedents, that simply will not fly. I want to close today by mentioning that I guess the campaign is underway now on Proposition 50. Now, I think it's clever of Gavin Newsom to name it Proposition 50. It's the 50 states, try to wrap it in the red, white, and blue. But this is a power grab straight up. And the Senate and Assembly of the state of California, I believe, drafted the gerrymandered maps that they are submitting in a period of days. They are as gross a gerrymander as anything I've ever seen. And again, I've been looking at these things for a lot of years. I've seen plenty. And the worst ones have always been by Democrats. Republicans do it too, but Democrats have developed it into an art. In California, this gerrymander is as effective as anything Philip Burton did back in the 1960s. So get ready for the campaign. Get ready to vote no on 50, to urge all your friends to vote no on 50, and hopefully to contribute money to the campaign to defeat Proposition 50. I think we've got a good shot of winning this one. So don't move into this with the idea, oh, they can do anything they want. No, they can't. And the last couple of them, we're going to put voter ID on the next ballot, too. So our forces march on. It's noon at Santa Cruz Voice. See you tomorrow at 9:06. Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Episode 189.